The microphone fed back for just a second before the room went quiet. 500 people in black tie, champagne flutes raised. The kind of evening that Sarah Hartley had spent 3 months building down to the last centerpiece. She was standing near the service corridor entrance when she heard her name. Not in applause, not in congratulation. In the flat, practiced voice of the man she had spent the last 3 years of her life with. "I want to say something before we move to the award presentations," Brandon Webb announced from the podium, loosening his collar like the words had been waiting too long to stay inside. "Sarah and I are done. I've been seeing someone else, someone who actually challenges me." He paused for just a moment. "I'm sorry it took me this long, to be honest." A few people looked toward the bar. A few more found the floor very interesting. Someone near the back actually whispered Sarah's name, followed by the word poor. Sarah did not move. She had spent 17 years learning to be small in rooms that were too bright, and this one was the brightest she had ever stood in. The chandelier above her threw light in every direction. There was nowhere to disappear. Brandon stepped down from the podium without looking at her. Then the room changed. She didn't hear the footsteps at first. She felt them. A shift in the air, the way a crowd parts before a storm arrives. A man crossed the ballroom floor in no particular hurry. His dark suit fitted in a way that suggested the tailor had been paid a great deal to make it look effortless. He was perhaps 40. With the kind of stillness that didn't belong in a room full of noise. He stopped beside her. He didn't say anything immediately. He simply removed his jacket, and with a steadiness that had no business being that gentle, laid it across her shoulders. "You look cold," he said, quietly enough that only she heard it. Sarah blinked. The jacket smelled like cedar, and something faintly expensive. She almost asked who he was. She almost said she was fine. Then she heard it, the sound of the room rearranging itself. Not all at once, one table at a time. A silver-haired man in the front row rose to his feet. His wife followed. Then a woman Sarah recognized from the city's zoning commission. Then the 2 men Brandon had spent the entire cocktail hour trying to impress. None of them were looking at Brandon. Mr. Farron. The silver-haired man nodded with something close to reverence. Aldo Farron gave the smallest acknowledgement and turned back to Sarah. Brandon's face had gone the color of old paper. Aldo didn't look at him. He looked only at Sarah, and his expression held a question that somehow wasn't condescending. "Can I get you out of here?" She wanted to say no. She had organized this gala. She had confirmed the florist at 6 in the morning, argued the venue into extending the kitchen deadline by 40 minutes, and personally trained every server on the dietary restriction protocol. Because the hotel's regular trainer had called in sick, she did not leave events early. But her hands were shaking under the jacket. "Yes," she said, "okay." They walked toward the side exit, not hurrying, not drawing more attention than they already had. The crowd parted in a way that felt almost involuntary, like water moving away from something solid. Brandon found his voice when she was 10 feet from the door. "Sarah." She stopped, old habit. Then she turned around. Not because he'd called her name, but because she'd decided to. She looked at him for a long moment, long enough for everyone watching to understand she was making a choice, not responding to one. She reached down and slid the small silver bracelet he had given her on their first anniversary off her wrist. She set it on the nearest table. Not thrown, not dramatic. Just set down, the way you set down something you realize you've been carrying too long. Then she walked out. The car waiting at the curb was black and unmarked. The driver opened the rear door without being asked. Sarah sat very straight in the back seat. She was not going to cry in front of a man she had never spoken to before this evening. "You don't have to stay," she said. "You've done more than enough." Where do you live? I'm serious. You don't have to. I know, he glanced at her. Where do you live? She told him. He told the driver. The city moved past the windows in long ribbons of light. I don't know who you are, she said eventually. Aldo Farron. The name meant nothing to her. It clearly meant a great deal to everyone else in that ballroom. But Sarah had spent 11 years with her head down in spreadsheets, and she didn't follow the kind of news that covered men like this. And you just attend Hotel Galas, she said. I don't. Then why were you there? He looked toward the window before answering. The Sterling Group's third quarter accounts were unusual. Sarah frowned. I keep those accounts. I know. Something shifted in her chest. The books are clean. Completely. He turned to look at her again. That's why they were unusual. She didn't know what to do with that. In 11 years working adjacent to the kind of money that didn't ask questions, she had learned one rule above everything else. Keep your name off things that shouldn't have your name on them. She coded transactions in ways that were boring and correct and unremarkable. She flagged anomalies before they became problems. She never looked directly at the parts she wasn't supposed to understand. You came to a 500-person gala, she said slowly, because a bookkeeper's ledgers were clean. I came because I wanted to know what kind of person produces that kind of work in that kind of environment. He paused. It takes a particular integrity to do the right thing when no one is checking. The car slowed outside her building. Neither of them moved to get out. You've been watching me, she said. Observing. That's the same thing. It isn't. She almost laughed. She didn't quite. I've seen you at 3 of our affiliated properties over the past 7 months, he said. The Meridian event in February. The charity auction in April, tonight. I work those events. I know. You also cover when the junior staff makes errors rather than reporting them. You bring extra meals to the loading dock workers on late nights. He paused. You thanked the cleaning crew at the Meridian by name. 4:30 in the morning. No one else was left in the building. Sarah looked at her hands. They worked until 4:30. Most people don't notice. Most people aren't paying attention. He looked at her as though she had just confirmed something he already believed. It was a disconcerting look, not unkind, just certain. She didn't invite him up. She also didn't tell him to leave, which was its own kind of answer. They stood near the elevator bank, and the silence between them was easier than it had any right to be. I always cover for the junior staff, she said, without knowing she was about to say it, because I know what it's like to be the person everyone forgets to defend. Aldo waited. Brandon told me I was too careful, too quiet, too much in the background. She smiled without humor. He said people forget you exist when you're always trying not to take up space. The lobby was empty. The elevator hummed somewhere above them. He wasn't wrong, she added, about the taking up space part. She glanced down at the lines of the gown she'd altered twice to accommodate her body, once in the boutique, once at home with borrowed needle and thread, because the seamstress had said, it'll look better if you lose a few inches first. I spent a long time trying to be smaller, for him, for the photos, for the rooms. Aldo's jaw tightened, barely perceptibly, but she noticed. He'd order for both of us at dinner, she continued. Salads, light things. He'd say, we're watching ourselves, right? Like it was a team effort. She stopped. And I'd just say yes, because it was easier than the conversation. She had never said any of this out loud before. It was strange how quickly words came free when someone was actually listening. He told the whole room, she said quietly. That's the part I keep coming back to. Not that he'd been seeing someone else. I think part of me knew. But that he did it there. Like I needed to be corrected publicly so everyone would understand he'd upgraded. The elevator arrived. Neither of them moved toward it. "The woman he's with is lovely," Sarah said. "Thin, decorative in a way I've never been." She looked up at the lit numbers above the doors. "I don't blame her. I blame myself for spending 3 years believing I could eventually be enough for someone who was already measuring me against a version of me I'd never become." "You were always enough," Aldo said. She glanced at him. "You don't know me." "I know more than you think. You know my ledgers." "I know," he said, "that you have worked in an industry that rewards looking the other way for over a decade, and your hands are completely clean. I know you've never taken a shortcut that would compromise someone else. I know you notice everyone the room ignores." He paused. "That's not nothing. That's everything." She pressed the elevator button. "Good night, Mr. Farron," she said. He held out a plain card, just a number, no title. She didn't leave it on the lobby table. 4 weeks passed. The gala footage circulated online for a while. Someone had caught the moment. The podium speech, Sarah's stillness, the bracelet placed on the table, and the internet decided it had feelings about all of it. Sarah didn't watch any of it. She went back to work on Monday. She corrected a junior accountant's error on a vendor invoice without mentioning it at the all-hands. She brought pastries on Thursday and told the loading dock crew they'd done exceptional work on the overnight weekend shift. Aldo sent coffee to her office on Tuesday, a short note with it, "Long week." She called the number on the card. "How did you know it was a long week?" she asked. "It's always a long week," he said. The coffee was an excuse. She found herself smiling at her desk for the first time in longer than she wanted to measure. He didn't overwhelm. He sent a message when something reminded him of a problem she'd mentioned. He appeared at one event she was coordinating, stood near the back, spoke to no one, and left before she could ask why he'd come. He never explained himself and never seemed to need to. She stopped trying to categorize what this was and started noticing, instead, that she'd begun ordering dessert again. 6 weeks after the gala, Brandon came back. He appeared at the hotel where she was finalizing setups for a private dinner, carrying the particular expression of a man who had recently done the math and didn't like what he'd found. "I made a mistake," he said. Sarah kept checking her clipboard. "I meant what I said about being sorry." "I heard you the first time," she said, "in front of 500 people." He flinched. I handled that badly." "Brandon," she looked at him directly, "why are you here?" "Because I want to fix this." "No," she said it simply, without heat. "You want to fix your access to something. You didn't know what that something was until you saw who stepped up in that ballroom." She tilted her head slightly. "You've spent 6 weeks reading about Aldo Farron." His silence confirmed it. "I'm not a door," she said. "I'm not a connection or a shortcut or a room you can walk back into when the hallway gets inconvenient." She looked at her clipboard again. "Please leave before I have to ask someone to help you do it." Brandon's expression moved through several stages. He reached for her arm. "I wouldn't." The voice came from the entrance. Aldo crossed the room in no hurry, as though he had arrived somewhere he was expected. 2 men she'd learned to recognize as he stayed near the door. He came forward alone, hands relaxed at his sides, and he stopped at the kind of distance that was both casual and absolute. "She asked you to leave," Aldo said. "This is a private conversation." It was. Aldo's tone was almost bored. "She ended it. You're the only one still talking." Brandon straightened his jacket. He tried the smile he used in meetings when he needed to appear unbothered. It didn't reach. "I don't know what she's told you, but she's not easy. She's difficult. She's stubborn. She doesn't know how to." "She knows," Aldo said, and his voice never changed temperature, "how to do the work of 4 people without asking for credit. She knows every staff member's name in 3 buildings. She's kept honest records in a business that does not reward honesty for 11 years, without a single exception. He paused. I've looked into a great many people over a great many years. Most of them are not that clean. The room was very still. What I think she is, Aldo continued, is someone you spent 3 years convincing to take up less space. And I find that. He chose the word carefully. Wasteful. Brandon looked between them. Whatever calculation he'd arrived at was not working out the way he'd planned. You'll regret this, he said, and even as the words left him, his voice sounded hollow. I already know what regret looks like, Aldo said. It walked into a hotel ballroom 6 weeks ago and tried to make one woman responsible for its own failures. He tilted his head. You should go. This time, Brandon went. The door closed. The room settled. Sarah set her clipboard down on the nearest table and looked at the man standing across the room from her, surrounded by half-set centerpieces and unlit tapers. You didn't have to do that, she said. I was in the neighborhood. You are never just in the neighborhood. Something close to a smile moved across his face. No. She crossed her arms, though not because she was cold. I handled it. You did. I was about to call security. I know. He was quiet for a moment. I stayed by the door until I was sure you needed me. That sentence sat between them differently than anything he had said before. Not I came to rescue you. Not I knew you couldn't manage. He had waited to see whether she could, and only moved when it mattered. She didn't know what to do with a man who did that. He came back because of you, she said. Not because of me. I know. That doesn't make you angry. It confirms what I already knew about him. Aldo came forward, stopping at a distance she hadn't indicated he should cross. What makes you think his reason for returning has anything to do with my reason for staying? She searched his face. What is your reason? She asked. He reached into his jacket pocket and removed a folded piece of paper. She frowned as he held it out. It was a printout, slightly creased, a message thread from the Sterling's internal system, dated 8 months ago. Loading dock team worked until 2 a.m. on the Meridian Close. Can someone make sure there's food left for them? They never ask and nobody thinks to check. She recognized her own words. She'd sent that message to the building manager and forgotten about it the same morning. You kept that, she said. It reminded me, he said, that the most reliable indicator of a person's character is what they do when no one important is paying attention. His eyes stayed on hers. I've been paying attention for a long time. She felt the walls she had spent years carefully building. Not for protection, she understood now, but for apology, begin to shift. I'm not going to change, she said. I'm not small. I'm not decorative. I will always bring pastries on Thursdays and remember the loading dock crew, and I refuse to be sorry for any of it. Good, he don't. And I'm still not sure I trust any of this. That's fair. I want to be chosen without conditions, she said, and her voice didn't waver the way she'd expected. Not because of who I connect you to or how I make you look. Just, she stopped, just as I am. Aldo was quiet for a moment. I watched you for 7 months before I said a single word to you, he said. There were no conditions. There was only a woman who made every room she entered better without asking to be recognized for it. He paused. I'm not asking you to trust me tonight. I'm asking you to let me be worth trusting over time. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she picked her clipboard back up, because there were 20 tables still to set. The dinner service starts at 7, she said. If you stay out of the way of the florists, I won't have you removed. He moved to the far end of the room and stayed there, quiet and unobtrusive, while she worked. She didn't look at him often, but she always knew exactly where he was. 8 months later, the loading dock at the Sterling Hotel was better supplied than it had ever been, not because management had finally noticed, Management still hadn't, but because someone had quietly arranged for it to be restocked on a regular schedule, and the crew who worked the late shifts had stopped finding empty tables at the end of the night. Nobody formally announced who was responsible. The crew had their own theories. They also had hot food waiting at 1 in the morning, and that seemed, to most of them, like enough. Sarah Hartley walked through the Sterling lobby on a Tuesday evening in late October at the angle she'd been practicing, not tilted down, not folded inward, not apologizing for the space her body occupied, but level, steady, taking up exactly the amount of room she had always deserved. Aldo was waiting near the entrance, not impatiently. He never waited impatiently. She stopped beside him. His hand found hers the way it had learned to, certain and unhurried, like a decision that had already been made and didn't need to be announced. Outside, the city moved in its usual way, indifferent and alive, and entirely unconcerned with the two of them. They moved with it. She didn't shrink. She didn't pull her shoulders forward or angle herself to take up less sidewalk. She walked at her full size, next to the man who had seen her clearly from across a crowded ballroom on the worst night of her life, and had never once asked her to be anything other than exactly this. And for the first time in a very long time, she believed that was worth something. She believed she was worth something. Not because he had told her so, because she had finally stopped arguing with the evidence.